Good morning, dear ladies and gentlemen. Common Learning Week Day 1 is about to begin. But before that, let me take a moment to review a few technical details. Today's webinar will be conducted in English. However, it comes with caption in the Zoom application. To view the caption, click the CC icon, then choose English Indonesia language. This webinar is also available on our YouTube channel BPPK Kemenq RI. That's all the information. Let us now begin Kemenq Learning Week Day 1, Economic Transformation. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome back to Kemenq Learning Week Day 1, Economic Transformation. First of all, I would like to thank God the Almighty that has given us blessings to virtually attend this webinar. And I would also like to extend a very warm welcome to the Acting Head of Financial Education and Training Agency, Bapak Sudarto, the Head of Public Finance Education and Training Center, Bapak Albertus Kurniadi Hendartono, and our special guest speaker, Bapak Wempi Saputra. I am Afrilia, and I'm honored to be the Master of Ceremony at this event. Today is the first day of the Kemenq Learning Week 2026. We would like to welcome you to this webinar series across 4 days with the theme of driving economic transformation in the changing world, where we will embark on a journey of learning, reskilling, and upskilling. Best regards to all participants who have joined us today, and I am very pleased to announce that we have hundreds of participants who are joining this event via Zoom and YouTube at the moment. Dear participants, to officially open this webinar, we are pleased to listen to the keynote speech delivered by the Head of Public Finance Education and Training Center, Bapak Albertus Kurniadi Hendartono. Good morning, Pak Kurniadi. How are you?
Good morning. It's amazing to join today's seminar.
Yeah, we are very pleased, Pak. Yes, we are very pleased to have you here, Bapak. Okay, without further ado, Pak Kurniadi, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Mbak Afrilia. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning. Yang saya hormati Pak Dr. Wempi Saputra, colleagues and participants of Kemenq Learning Week 2026. It is a pleasure to welcome all of you today, and I would like to extend our sincere appreciation to our distinguished speaker, Bapak Dr. Wempi Saputra. As we know, previously beliau adalah staf ahli Menteri Keuangan and currently the Executive Director of the World Bank Group of Southeast Asia for joining this session. As far as I'm concerned, today's topic, driving economic transformation in a changing world, remind us that transformation is no longer an option. It is a necessity for ensuring Indonesia's future prosperity. Ladies and gentlemen, we are living in a period of rapid global change. Technology is evolving quickly. Demographic pressures are increasing. And climate challenges are reshaping how economies how economies grow. Models of development that once depended mainly on natural resources and low-cost labor are becoming less sustainable. Across the world, growth is increasingly driven by first, innovation skills, digitalization, as well as sustainability. The digital economy, creative industries, and the green and the blue economy are becoming key sources of competitiveness and job creation. Economic transformation, therefore, is not only about higher growth. It is about building an economy that is more productive, more resilient, and more inclusive. Indonesia faces both opportunity and challenge in this transition. We have strong potential, a growing digital economy, a young population, and abundant opportunities in sustainable industry. At the same time, structural challenges remain. There are productivity gaps, skill mismatches, and from Sabang to Merauke, there are uneven regional development. Global uncertainty from geopolitical tension to supply chains disruptions add further complexity. These changes mean that past policy approaches alone will not be sufficient. Economic transformation requires new thinking, stronger coordination, and of course, better policy integration. In this process, the Ministry of Finance plays a central role. Through fiscal policy formulation and its implementation, we help shape the direction and speed of Indonesia's transformation. Distinguished participants, building on these challenges and opportunities, today's presentation that will be delivered by Bapak Wempi does not seek to offer a single best policy receipt. Instead, it invites us to think critically and strategically about resilience, innovation, and long-term competitiveness in an increasingly complex world. As we listen to Bapak Dr. Wempi Saputra, let us use this forum not only to understand global risks, but to shape practical and forward-looking solution for Indonesia's economic transformation. It is now my great honor to invite Bapak Dr. Wempi Saputra to share his insights, to share his thoughts with us. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Pak Kurniadi, for your keynote speech. We understand that you may have other commitments, so if you feel free to leave this webinar at your convenience, of course. Thank you once again. Ladies and gentlemen, now it's time for the main event that we have been waiting for. But before that, I'd like to make a housekeeping announcement for our audience. Ladies and gentlemen, our honorable guests, if you don't mind, please keep your camera on and your microphone muted throughout the entire session. The talk will go on for about 45 minutes, followed by 20 minutes of Q&A session. If you're joining from Zoom, you can either click on the raise hand button and I will call your name, or write down your questions into the Zoom chat, to which I will read them as well. And if you're joining us through live streaming on YouTube, please write down your questions into live chat and I will read them. Also, do not forget to join the course in Common Q Learning Center, or KLC. Complete the evaluation form, that is very important, available in the course to get certificate. The joint code will be announced later at the end of this webinar. Dear participants, now allow me to introduce our distinguished speaker, Bapak Wempi, who will deliver his talk, Driving Economic Transformation in a Changing World. Dr. Wempi Saputra, he is Executive Director, World Bank Group since 1 November 2022. He represents the Southeast Asia Voting Group at the World Bank Group, covering 11 countries across Southeast Asia and the Pacific. He served on the Audit Committee and Human Research Committee with over 30 years of experience in development economics, finance, trade, and institutional reform. He advances impactful policy and multilateral cooperation at both national and global levels. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Bapak Wempi Saputra. Good evening, Pak Wempi, at the Washington, yeah, if I'm not mistaken. Here it's good morning.
Yes, good evening, Mbak Aprilia,
Yeah.
Pak Kurniadi, Pak Arfi, all colleagues. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, we are very pleased to have you here, Pak Wempi. The audience and the participants are very keen to learn from your expertise. I'm sure for that. Okay, without further ado, the screen is yours, Pak Wempi.
Thank you very much again, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Greetings from United States. So today, for the next 40-45 minutes, allow me to share with you some of the this quite heavy lifting in my view, driving economic transformation in a changing world. As Pak Kunadi has mentioned, there is no single recipe, but try to give you some ideas to exchange, then to dig deeper for the next step of this transformation journey. The next slide on the outline, I would like to discuss 4 main themes about the global growth dynamics, structural changes in emerging market and developing economies, MDs, landscape of global changing world, and World Bank Group efforts in advancing development. So those of you who are now maybe writing a doctoral thesis, master thesis, I think it's a good idea to have this kind of the understanding, because I'll bring you the latest publication from Global Economic Prospects in January 2026, IMF publications, OECD, and even some of the World Bank operation updates. So hopefully can make this kind of exchange ideas much more fruitful. In this slide number 3, I'll start with global growth dynamics. So when we see the latest publications of the global growth forecast by the World Bank, I choose from the World Bank in this case, we see that global growth varies between advanced economies and emerging market and developing economies, the MDs. As you see, advanced economies like United States, down the line from 2023, 2.9%, then declining until 1.9% forecast in 2027. Whereas like MDs like Indonesia are projected to experience a more robust expansion. As you know, the latest publication of our economic growth in Q4 2025 is around 5.39%, which is concluding our FY25 economic growth is 5.11%. This is very good and outstanding performances among other peers. So when we see these projections for the next maybe for 3 years from 25 until 27, it seems that MD is contributing much more expansion to global economic activity. And for this, actually, not only about benefiting from the diversified economy and strong domestic consumption, and also investment in many sectors, youth populations and ongoing reforms in many developing economies, Indonesia, India, Vietnam, the Philippines, and again, investment attractiveness. So this global growth forecast, if we see that for the next 3 years, starting 25, 26, 27, so MDs much more contributes to global growth and also focusing on especially in East Asia Pacific, and then in South Asia. The next slide, I would like to discuss a little bit on East Asia Pacific recent development, which is focusing on China contribution to GDP growth and growth in selected EAP economies. The first graph illustrates the components of GDP growth over several quarters and projection up to 2025. So we can see from these breakdowns, the final consumption expenditure, gross capital formation, net exports, and also all contributing to global overall GDP growth. The bars show GDP growth percentages with colors representing different components. For example, the consumption, dark blue, is a significant contributor to GDP, this for China, while net export, which is colored in yellow, have a fluctuating effect. So what we could see from the second graph, actually the second graph compares GDP growth rates of various Southeast Asian economies from fiscal 24 Q4 to projected growth in fiscal 25 Q3. So as you see, Indonesia, Malaysia, perhaps the Philippines, and even Vietnam now very much expand the economy growth compared to Thailand. So in this case, we could understand this graph involve observing the relative size of color section to identify not only what is the biggest components driving the economy growth, we could also examine how this growth trend compare over time, providing also a snapshot of economic health and potential. So this is, I think, quite easy slide to understand. In the slide number 6, allow me to share with you risk to the global outlook. Normally, we discuss this risk not only about the downside risk, but also the upside risk. Downside risks include resurgent trade tension and policy uncertainty, which eventually can hinder growth and investment, increase conflict and geopolitical stress, elevate economic volatility, while tighter financial condition may restrict access to capital. Is very important for economic growth. And additionally, more frequent and severe weather-related disasters, the climate change, threaten infrastructure and productivity. What kind of the upside risks you could identify so far? So at least there are 2 upside risks in this case. Lower drag from trade barriers could enhance global trade flow. At the same time, technology-led investment and productivity gains may drive economic expansion by fostering innovations, improving efficiency and effectiveness of the manufacturing sector, especially and value-added sectors. We could monitor the downside risks and upside risks to understand the global growth dynamics. In the slide number 7, this is about key risks and headwinds. This is quite, some of the financial stress scenario in the first graph on the left side. We see that by using the percentage point as far as the downside risk previously mentioned materialize, then we could expect a downside risk creating this financial stress scenario is around maybe around 20% percentage point for the world. Advanced economies suffer much more, goes to around 40%. You see the bars goes to minus 0.4, so it's about 40%. And then for MDs, it's around 10%. So this kind of the downside is very dangerous for global growth dynamics in this case. The second graph depicts interest rate dynamics on government debt, which reveals distinct trend between the MDs excluding China. Normally, some of the analysis also exclude China, and low-income countries or LICs. MDs generally exhibit high effective interest rate compared to advanced economies, reflecting greater risk perception and volatility associated with these markets. In addition, within MDs, those excluding China typically have even higher rates, likely due to increased fiscal challenges. Fiscal space is very now become narrower and less diversified economies. So it might happen, let's say, in Caribbean and also in Pacific countries. As of the low-income countries, they often face the highest effective interest rates among these groups because it's driven by limited access to capital markets and higher perceived default risk. So this can hinder their ability to finance development and manage debt effectively. The third graph illustrates the global trade growth rates, comparing current metrics to the average from 2000 to 2019. The bars reflect a notable decline in trade growth in recent years, particularly in post-2020, contrasting sharply with the pre-2020 average, actually, which typically showed robust growth rates, highlighting the steady expansion of global trade prior to the pandemic. So the current figures indicate significant volatility driven by factors such as supply chain disruptions, geopolitical tensions, and changing trade policies. In the slide number 8, this is about job challenges. The first graph shows the projection distribution of the global young population around age 0 until 24 in 2035. Unfortunately, now some of the regions, you may say EAP is Asia Pacific, ECA is European Central Asia, LAC is Latin American and Caribbean, MNA is Middle East and North Africa, SAR is South Asia regions, and SSA is a South Sahara Africa. So what we can see from this graph is Sub-Saharan Africa accounts for the largest share, approaching around 35-40% of the world's youth, reflecting its high fertility and rapid population growth. South Asia follows with around 20-25%, EAP around maybe 15%, more or less, and Latin American Caribbean roughly around 8 until 10%. Unfortunately, Europe and Central Asia, together with Middle East and North Africa, hold the smallest shares. I think it's below 10%. So overall, the composition highlights a pronounced shift of global youth concentration toward Sub-Saharan Africa by 2035. The second graph shows changes in the working age population across regions. Sub-Saharan Africa records the largest increase, followed by South Asia, so consistent with the previous graph. East Asia Pacific experienced a sharp decline, while Europe and Central Asia also contracts. Latin America shows modest growth. Overall labor force expansion is concentrated in Africa and South Asia. And the third graph shows when regions reach peak working age population growth, we can see that East Asia Pacific and Europe and Central Asia have already passed their peak, meaning that they are now experiencing an aging population, while the Sub-Saharan Africa peak lies further ahead, with growth still accelerating. From this slide, we can take a key takeaway that for the next 15 years, or even maybe until 2050, mostly young populations comes from only two regions, from Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. In the slide number 9, what kind of policy priorities the government might consider to see this kind of challenges? So this is not an exhaustive policies. This might create also maybe exchange ideas and some options, the policy formulation the government might consider. The first, the government might boost job creation and long-term growth by investing in infrastructure and human capital. This is the first pillar for economic development. At the same time, improving governance, strengthening institutions. This is the second pillar. And then mobilizing private capital, the third pillar. If we do this, and hopefully also with the deepening trade and financial integration, especially in frontier markets, the job challenge, what we have been facing, what we have been facing before, we can tackle together. The second, how to diversify trade partnership and deepen regional linkages. In this case, we could expand trade agreements, including services. As you know now, with the global tariff from the United States, 10%, now increase become 15%, become a global trade uncertainty. Many countries now lowering trade barriers. They promote investment, advancing and enhancing the bilateral cooperations, and restoring predictable policies and transparent trade relations. So this kind of the recipe might be considered by the government on the second pillars. The third pillar is how to strengthen resilience to shock through stronger domestic resource mobilization. And this is not easy. Easier said than done. Sometimes we talk about the increase in the tax revenue, expanding the tax base, increasing the tax rate, the better fiscal rules, credible monetary frameworks. But at the same time, also many challenges. As you know, as a policymaker, some of you also comes from the government's institution. There are three challenges of these policies. First, economically sensible. Second, politically visible. And the third, socially acceptable. So these policy priorities might satisfy those three criteria before going into the implementation. In the slide number 10, allow me to talk a little bit on uneven recovery following the pandemic global recession. These very busy slides in this case. So I will try to give you some idea. 1975, because we are now many crises before 1975, oil shocks, 1982, actually the second oil shocks, 1991, this is multiple shocks, global asset bubbles collapse in Japan, 2009 after the global financial crisis, and 2020 after the COVID-19 crisis. So this kind of the recession and recovery, actually, we can see from these graphs, creating more dynamics economic growth, especially global on the global level. As of the countries with lower per capita GDP, we see that the second graph, the world advanced economies, AEs, MDs, IDA I mean International Development Assistance. This is low-income countries, consists of around 78 countries. Low-income countries, leaks is around 26 countries. And FCS, fragile, conflicts, affected situation. So this kind of a categorization, if we see the percentage of the post 2009 recovery, post 2020 recovery, it seems that in the graph we can see post 2020 recovery much more faster. So meaning that like in the FCS, many countries like United States or G7 plus countries helping Ukraine. Now many countries also helping Gaza. There are also some conflicts in Africa, around 7 military coups in Mali, Burkina Faso, DRC, Rwanda, and some countries in Africa. Also, we have in our ASEAN is Myanmar. In Latin America, we have Haiti. So this kind of the post-2020 recovery much more faster, but also we can see that very weak in vulnerable MDs. And at the same time, for the last graph, we can see that unfortunately, FCS countries, low-income countries, IDA countries, and MD experiencing slower growth expansion and also income convergence compared to advanced economies, meaning that more wider global wealth compared to advanced economies with regards to the MDs and low-income countries. In this slide number 11, we talk about promise of frontier market economies. So frontier markets are less developed than emerging markets, but they are now growing very fast. The population are increasing, meaning that more workers and consumers in the future. And then if you can see from the graph, financial openness also a bit lower compared to the emerging markets. And there is one categorization meant ODE, other developing economies. This is the country, low-income countries and experiencing conflicts. DRC, Sudan, Yemen, Burkina Faso, DRC, Congo, and this kind of the countries belongs to the ODE. So Indonesia, fortunately, belongs to emerging markets, Brazil, Turkey, China, Colombia, and many others. I think you can what you call it, search later in the Global Economic Prospect reports. And what we can see, share of global capital inflows, emerging markets still dominating compared to frontier markets and ODE. These countries are opening up to global trade finance, especially those frontier markets, attracting more foreign investment. In ASEAN, Vietnam is considered as frontier markets. And of course, more money is flowing into these markets nowadays than early 2000s. And now they are becoming important players, especially experiencing the trade diversion from China. Vietnam now is very, very fast moving and creating more manufacturing sectors. In slide number 12, what are the structural changes happening in MD right now? This slide sets up the next topic actually, how developing countries are changing. And if we see the structural changes in MDs, not only about facing the 1.2 billion young people entering the workforce soon by 2035, this World Bank study, unfortunately, the employment, the jobs that may be provided by the government, only 400 million jobs. So what happened with the rest 800 million people, young people entering the workforce? So they are now struggling, competing each other. So this kind of very, very severe challenge might be faced by many governments for the next 10, 15 years. And for this reason, countries that invest have to be focused on jobs creations so that they not only providing the opportunity for the young people to get jobs, alleviate poverty, at the same time also preventing illegal migration, preventing social unrest in those countries. So these challenges actually, the jobs 1.2 billion is not an abstract. This is reality, and we will be facing it soon. In the slide number 14, let's talk about tariff restriction and also what happened with the US tariff on, especially on East Asia Pacific countries. As you know, US has been implementing reciprocal tariff, mostly taxing on imports goods. Now we are focusing on, let's say, China in our EAP. China is receiving very high tariffs on top of this global tariff, around 10 or 15%. And what is the consequence on this? So China now, tariff differential between China and the rest of East Asia Pacific countries become wider, meaning that China become less competitive compared to other countries in East Asia Pacific regions. And the next slide might also explain more details on this trade reorientation, where ASEAN 5, so Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, the Philippines, Vietnam, increase their exports more to US, taking advantage of the lower tariffs compared to China. And at the same time, there is trade diversions. Many goods from China exported to all MDs, and they try to find more bilateral relation with those countries, expanding and pouring those export goods from China to MDs as well as the low-income countries. So this kind of trade diversion, we don't know until when, but now the trade uncertainty in global trade dynamics become very much challenging. In the next slide, this is China exports more intermediate goods to the regions, is part of the trade diversion. And unfortunately, not all countries benefiting from this. The nearest one is Cambodia, Vietnam, and the Philippines, and even also the Malaysia. And Indonesia also, I think, part of those who benefits from these China trade diversions. And then from this, actually, if those countries imports the finished goods, so it might create less positive effect on the employment. But if they import intermediate goods, machinery, and other goods actually categorized in intermediate goods, then it might create also increasing employment in those countries. For example, in Vietnam, they import part of the materials, machines, and now they create jobs because they use this for local factories. And if we import a finished good from China, let's say textile, it might also hurt local jobs because they compete with the local products. So in the slide number 17, we will discuss about rules of origins. As you know, because of these trade dynamics, there are some limitations. From United States, once you have a good trade relation with China, would like to export to United States, they will examine how many percentage part of these goods, raw materials come from China. It might create also some trade disputes. So for this case, some countries try to avoid trade bilateral with China when they would like to export the finished goods to the United States. Instead of that, they will try to focus on maybe regions in ASEAN or maybe East Asia Pacific to export the products rather than to the United States because there is some stringence of this rule of origins regulations from the United States. So in this case, some of the companies, as you know, they try to make a lobby, they try to make bilateral relations, how to qualify for these lower tariffs, and at the same time also opening their markets to other countries so that they can send their export goods not only to United States but also to other countries. Why United States is very important? Because their consumption is very large. As you know, the United States itself, their consumption rate now is around 6 trillion US dollars. So can absorb many parts of the world. Export goods especially comes from developing countries or maybe comes from emerging market and developing economies. In the slide number 18, rise of distorted industrial policy. So this is quite concerning because when this trade diversion, also the trade uncertainty, trade dispute is happening, many countries now potentially or maybe already implementing distortive industrial policy measures. And unfortunately, these numbers are growing. East Asia countries are increasingly using this policy, subsidy, trade barriers to protect the industries. And then this policy can make trade less fair and efficient, possibly leading to trade conflicts and even hurting economic growth. So now like China, now increasing the number of new distortive measures. This comes from a global trade atlas. Indonesia as well, a bit declining for the last, I think, a couple months. Japan, Kingdom of Cambodia, Korea also increasing. Singapore a bit declining, and the Philippines still very high, especially Thailand and Vietnam. Let's talk about the landscape of global changing world for our consideration. This figure illustrates key factors influencing the future of global landscape. I think Pak Kunadi has mentioned some of those. So how to navigate interconnected inflection points that we see nowadays, and what kind of the opportunity we can gather from this momentum. There are at least maybe 6 factors influencing the future of global world landscape. The global labor market is experiencing turmoil nowadays, while the US tariff are altering global trade dynamics. The AI revolution is rapidly progressing, impacting various sectors. And nowadays, many employments in the United States, when you apply for the jobs, they will ask you what kind of AI credentials you had to apply for these jobs. Energy transition is gaining traction, demanding new investment and policies. In addition to this, actually, geopolitical tension and escalating global risks are presenting challenges. Lastly, demographic shift necessitate the development of longevity economy, highlighting the need for adaptable strategies in a changing world. So these factors might increase, might be much more severe, or maybe less severe in the next couple of years. It very much depends. But as you see, the AI revolutions, energy transition, geopolitical fracture or geopolitical tensions, and some demographic shifts is already happening. And this is very challenging for many parts of the world, including Indonesia. How we could derive the way forward in this case? So there is no single recipe, in my view, for the best policy. This figure outlines strategic priorities for fostering sustainable development and economic resilience. So at the top, as you see, multilateral solutions and renewed global collaborations are emphasized as essential for addressing shared challenges. There is no chance to get more prosperity or boosting shared prosperity in global level without these multilateral solutions. The rapid scaling of upskilling and reskilling initiatives focuses on those most vulnerable to job displacement. Ensuring workforce readiness in changing markets comes the next. Because it's very important, especially for now the young people. As we talked before, 1.2 billion of the young people, young population will enter the workforce. And unfortunately, only 400 million jobs are available. The redesign of financial system aims to enhance private capital mobilization, empowering communities, and promoting a longevity society that support extended life and health become also factors could be considered for the way forward. Domestic policy reform and consistent policy making are vital for creating favorable conditions for growth and innovation, of course, attracting investment. And last but not least, how to promote digital literacy and technological adoption, particularly among women and youth, because women and youth are in many cases always put in the footnote of development, not as main actors. So it's very crucial actually for inclusive development, how to enable wide participation in the economy, and at the same time also equitable societies to address the global challenges together. Let me give some statistics for these slides actually. In the last publication of World Economic Forum, it indicates that global collaboration can lead to addressing crises as seen during the COVID-19 pandemic. So a study showed that countries in strong multilateral agreements manage economic recovery more effectively. The second, according to the World Bank, up to 375 million workers worldwide may need to change occupational categories by 2030 due to automation. So programs focused on reskilling can significantly mitigate jobs loss impacts. In the World Bank, we call it learn how to learn. So adaptive, learn how to learn. So in 2020, the IFC, the International Finance Corporation, highlighted that around $5 trillion is needed, $5 trillion is needed in financing for developing countries to achieve SDGs. In many publications of ECOSOC, UN agency, they mention about $4 until $5 trillion need to achieve SDGs. So how to enhance financial mobilization is very crucial for this progress. About domestic policy reforms, OECD, I think, highlighted that regulatory reform could increase GDP by up to 1.5% in some countries. And digital literacy, I think UNESCO, I think for the last publication mentioned about 775 million adults are still illiterate, emphasizing the need for targeted literacy program initiative focusing on women and youth to boost the participation in the economy, but also enhance overall society capability or society resilience. In the next slide, we talk about what World Bank Group has been doing so far. This is actually compiling the vision and mission and the scorecard, World Bank playbook, and financing models. As you know, World Bank has three modalities in financing for development. So creating mission to alleviate poverty, extreme poverty, in livable planet, and then how to foster the boost and how to foster or maybe to boost the shared prosperity. And for this, World Bank also emphasizing the operating model effectiveness and efficiency, inviting the country ownership, and at the same time also enhancing the analytics, financial products, and incentives. Let me give you some sense about the next World Bank efforts for the last maybe 5 to 6 years. World Bank now focusing on jobs. As I mentioned before, 1.2 billion young people will enter the workforce in the next 10, 15 years, and around 400 million jobs will be generated. So three pillars of the World Bank strategy to help many countries to tackle these challenges. First, partnering with the public sector. This is creating the foundation infrastructure, human capital, and physical capital. And we use IBRD and IDA in this case. The private sector, the public sector arm of the World Bank Group. Second pillar, how to mobilize the private sector. So IFC and MIGA mobilize the capital, enhancing the private capital mobilization. And the third one, harnessing the knowledge bank. And we identify at least there are 5 key sectors that could be mobilized to enhance the labor force participation. Infrastructure including energy, agribusiness, healthcare, tourism, and value-added manufacturing. The next slide is about World Bank Group commitments. I think you can later on can see these numbers. For the last 6 years, this is fiscal year 25. Our portfolio is amounting $118.5 billion across 140 countries with around 700 projects. And nowadays, World Bank has around $347 billion asset under management with around 4,000 active projects in 140 countries. And the next slide is about key performance outcome, what we have been doing, some achievements, outcomes of how to provide better access for food to around 209 million people until the energy sectors. I would like to conclude my presentation by giving you some 4 key takeaways. So the world is still seeing increased international disputes and geopolitical tensions. There is no single recipe. We are now facing lacking global leadership. The second, multilateral actions with renewed global collaborations based on mutual benefits approach is commendable. This might create also trade diversion, might create geopolitical dynamics, might create a new geoeconomic fragmentation. So we should foster our multilateral actions in ASEAN, or maybe ASEAN plus 3, in APEC, in G20, in other fora. We should strengthen this multilateral cooperation. The third, MDs have momentum for leap growth through more and quality jobs. As I mentioned before, focusing very specific sectors, agribusiness, health, tourism, infrastructure including energy, and value-added manufacturing might create potential for the government to foster, to direct the fiscal policy, monetary policy, financial sector policy to those sectors to create jobs, providing opportunity to young people for the next maybe 10 to 15 years. And the last key takeaway is there is no single recipe to increase domestic growth problem, but policy consistency is a must. Many critics actually comes from the global fora to MDs like Indonesia. There were critics about what kind of the policy consistency in the country, whether the policy in this current regime will be sustainable for the next regime. And the second critics is about too many captains in the field. When we talk about one sector, there are so many institutions has their own mandate. Local government has their own mandate. Central government has their own mandate. Even many agencies also has their own mandate. But when we talk about end-to-end process, unfortunately, not so many people can describe and who can solve this problem. So this kind of the critics, policy consistency, and too many captains in the field creating higher transaction costs might also limit the investment attractiveness, might also limit the willingness of those investors, especially global investors, to invest in this country and increasing the country risk. So I'll stop here. Back to the moderator, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Bapak Wempi, for the insightful talk. Ladies and gentlemen, our distinguished guests, please join me in expressing our sincere appreciation to Dr. Wempi Saputra from the World Bank Group for his insightful and thoughtful provoking presentation on driving economies transformation in a changing world. We have just heard a comprehensive overview of the evolving global landscape marked by slowing growth, geopolitical tensions, shifting trade dynamics, technological disruption, and the pressing jobs challenge of facing emerging economies. His message clearly reminds us that while there is no single formula for growth, policy consistency, resilience, and collaborations are essential. Okay, we will now open the floor for a Q&A session. I would like to invite all participants to engage directly with Dr. Wempi, whether to seek clarification, share perspective, or raise strategic questions. If you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand. Kindly mention your name and institution before speaking. Okay. Okay, to be able to accommodate as many participants as possible, please keep your question concise because we just have like a 20 minutes Q&A session. Okay, I'd like to call upon Senja. Please tell us your name and your institution, then ask your question briefly.
The opportunity. My name is Shirley Sinjarindiani from the Ministry of Communication and Digital Affairs. Thank you for the Ministry of Finance that provide us with this good opportunity. I actually want to ask this, but I don't know who to ask and where to ask. So my question is, as we know that many countries are competing to develop advanced technology, but however, the technology research is very expensive and has a high risk of failure. In infrastructure projects, we can use schemes like public-private partnership to reduce the fiscal burden. But in technology innovation, the industry is very dynamic and uncertain, and the success is not guaranteed. So my question is, what is the alternative funding schemes that the government could design to support the technology innovation without putting too much pressure on public finance? And maybe Pak Wempi could give us an insight from the World Bank about this. So because I'm working in the finance department in the Ministry of Communication and Digital, so I'm eager to know what is your take on this issue. Thank you, Pak Wempi.
MP
Can I take
doesn't mind
two
to
more
answer.
questions?
Oh,
So
okay.
maybe three questions at the same time? Yes, yeah.
Okay. Is there any Gulo? Okay. Okay, I'd like to call upon Gulo, please, Mr. Gulo. Ask your question briefly. Thank you. Please unmute the
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, good evening, Pak Wimpi. I hope you are doing well in these days. I'm Gulo from the Bureau of Communication and Information Service, Secretary General of the Ministry of Finance. In your presentation, the World Bank often talks about tech-led investment as a major upside risk for growth. But looking at Indonesia lately, we see a worrying problem. On one hand, our biggest successes like Traveloka is moving their headquarters to Singapore to escape local legal and capital hurdles. And on the other hand, if you copy about the e-fishery scandal, one of Indonesia's most invested startup by global venture capital and angel investors, where 75% of their revenue was reportedly faked. It shows that our growth is sometimes built on bad data and weak auditing. My question is, how the World Bank help Indonesia government fix this crisis of trust in our startup governance so that the upside risk does not just turn into the next multi-million dollar fraud? Thank you.
Okay, Pak Wempi, could you clearly take the question? I guess there must be like technical issues on the microphone probably.
Yeah, I can hear
okay.
for the last part, but I can try, hopefully. So maybe
Okay.
one more question.
Okay,
Mbak
one more
Frida.
questions. Okay, Miss Lydia. Yeah, all right. Miss Lydia, could you hear me? Yeah, you could unmute your microphone and your start question now.
Good evening, Mr. Wempi. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Ririn. I'm from Communication and Information Services Department. As we know that nowadays we can access information easily. But from your perspective, what's the most efficient approach to deliver public policies, for example, financial digital literacy, as you mentioned before, to global community, especially Indonesia citizen. Therefore, the misperceptions can be minimalized. Thank you.
Okay, Pak Wempi.
Okay, thank you, Mbak Frida. Thank you for the question, colleagues. I'm not expecting very difficult question tonight, but I try. So for Senja, so this is actually regarding the technological development. In the World Bank, we talk about two options. Whether the country might chase the latest technological age or the broad adoptions. So talking about technology is very expensive things. So in this case, I might suggest the government could create not only about the environment, the enabling environment, but also the scheme for financing.
From you?
In the World Bank, we foster this by using two strategies. The first, combining the public and the private sector financing. So IBRD and IDA normally creating more catalytic role, conducting diagnostic of the opportunities, challenges of those sectors. And then IFC and MIGA, by using their own private sector arm, tries to mobilize private capital mobilization. So let me give you one example in one of my constituency in Southeast Asia. So IFC just invested around $50 million in data center projects for this technology. And then by using IFC convening power, they can mobilize around 18 times to become $900 million. Why they can do this? The government provides quite robust energy policy, regulatory reform, and providing the catalytic role, especially on guaranteeing this investment. And at the same time, those private sector can go into the country and see this potential business to be created. So this kind of there is no single recipe on what would be the best financing scheme, But at least in our constituency in Southeast Asia, they have been doing this by providing and combining these public sector arms, catalytic financing from the government, regulatory reform, and at the same also mobilizing private capital. The second thing, actually, Gulo, I'm not so sure that I can take, but you mentioned about how to handle the crisis of trust, and it's very difficult questions. In the World Bank, we are focusing on three things on this trust. First, fostering transparency. So if you're transparent, many people can judge, many people can value, many people can examine. So every people, if we do transparency in many ways, in HR policy, in financing, in portfolio, in operational effectiveness, so everybody can do and to examine whether we have been doing good or only just feel good. So creating transparency is very, very prominent in tackling this kind of trust. The second thing, actually, we increase our accountability mechanism. So the crisis of trust, it is not only on investment, but also about the governance. So once we violate this kind of trust, it's quite difficult to gain it back. So in this case, the World Bank foster what we call accountability mechanism. We have call it 5 eyes, lima mata, 5 eyes. So 5 institutions independent from the World Bank examining the policy, examining the financing sector, examining the project preparation, examining the private sector development, and examining integrity of the staff. So this kind of accountability mechanism could be created by the government so that we can increase trust. Hopefully, I can also give you another example maybe for Indonesian case in this case. And the third one, actually, this kind of trust. So we invite the third party as part of our cooperation. When you do investment in some countries, maybe you cannot trust easily those partners. But when you invite another parties, they will try to scrutinize all necessary things so that the investment is robust and profitable. So for this, inviting the third party to examine our own policy, examine our own standards, could create also another trust. The third question from Lydia, so communication and information, this is not an easy path actually. In many cases, in international organizations like UN, IMF, the World Bank, and it seems to me they are very much focusing on very simple messages. How do you relate the vision and mission of the institutions into the real thing they have been doing so far? So violating this kind of vision and mission, doing the other thing, might create also distrust. So communicating this much more easier because you can use maybe another social media, but I think much more useful using the proper channel like the website of those institutions. Creating some communication through social media also very important, but also sometimes creating or maybe inviting many comments, many I don't know counterproductive discussions that might create another potential unfruitful discussion. The World Bank in this case focusing only two channels on the delivering the public policy. The first to the websites, the second to the seminars or maybe the public hearing. So we can regularly giving an understanding to those people outside the World Bank and try to give them some idea, the understanding what we have been doing, and also maybe inviting some aspiration from the external shareholders so that they can also participate in examining, in valuing, or also in participating themselves into the projects or into the activities the World Bank has been conducted. So this kind of the two-way communications between the institution and the external stakeholders is very important, and there is no what you call it best efforts to satisfy all people. So there's always critics. There are critics from NGOs, critics from the think tanks, critics from many parts of the world. But as far as you are transparent, fostering genuinity, and explain in the proper channel, we can handle these kind of challenges. So hopefully I could answer all the question and apologize if there are some missing interpretation of this question. Back to Mbak Aprilia.
All right. Thank you so much for the questions, 3 questions, and the discussion with Pak Wempi. But I still see there are still some raised hands. Pak Wempi, would you like to take 1 or 2 questions more? Because I bet they are so eager to discuss with you directly.
Okay, Mbak Aprilia.
Yeah,
Open-
okay.
open
1
to-
or 2
yeah.
question. Okay. We have a question from a participant on Zoom chat. Allow me to read it from Nurul Ardaningar. Okay, given the concurrent pressures of trade fragmentation, persistent financial tightening, and escalating climate risk, is the export-led growth paradigm structurally sustainable for EMDEs, or are we witnessing the need for a rebalancing toward domestic demand-led growth? How should policymakers manage the trade-offs involved in such transitions? Okay, would you mind answering the questions, or would you take one more question?
Maybe, yes. I see there are 3 more raising hands, so I
Yeah.
can, I think, answer simultaneously. Maybe from Pak Dwi,
Okay.
Johanna, and
Okay, we can
yeah.
give the opportunity to Pak Dwi. Pak Dwi Widiatmoko.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good evening, Pak Wempi. It's great to see you again. Thank you for your insight. I recently read the World Bank Digital Progress and Trend Report, which show while middle income countries like Indonesia are the major user of AI, but the infrastructure remain concentrated in high income economies like US or Europe. Given this structural gap, how can middle income countries like Indonesia, for example, strategically leverage AI to reposition their role in future global landscape? Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Probably one more question from Johanna. Yeah. Okay, Johanna. Okay. There are possibly technical issues. Okay.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity and good morning, Mr. Wemby. It is an honor to hear your insight in this session. And as we can see, climate change has had a profound effect worldwide. And this also has prompted many countries, including in Asia, to move towards a green economy and to adopt carbon pricing. I would like to hear your opinion on how implementing carbon pricing might affect Indonesia's economic growth. Do you think this policy is the right move, despite its potentially regressive effects? Thank you so much, Mr. Wempi.
Okay, I hope the 3 question is enough. Mr. Wempi, would you give him the answer?
Thank you for the questions from Nurul. This is regarding the trade fragmentation, persistent financial tightening, and escalating climate risk. So export-led growth paradigm, structurally sustainable for MDs, I think still maintain. So in this case, there are 3 sources of economic growth so far, especially from MDs. First, investment. So this investment should create also jobs, not only wasting investment. We should create job from this investment. In Indonesia, like MBG, makanan bergizi gratis, should create jobs, and at the same time also could create multiplying effects on supply chains. So if we are thinking about the so-called domestic consumption, this is very prominent to increase to create growth. The second, actually, from the exports. Export also creating this kind of the very favorable growth, because for the MD, this is a chance to connect with the global supply chain, at the same time also doing the trade networking. So, as you mentioned in your question, are we witnessing the need for rebalancing toward domestic demand-led growth? Indeed, but not all countries can produce themselves. So in many countries, they try to produce products for their self-sufficiency, but at the same time also they might create competitiveness. In order to fulfill this kind of needs, they have to import from other countries. So the third sources of growth is from the investment. So when we talk about what policymakers can do in creating these drivers of growth from consumptions, from the investment, from the exports, I think creating enabling environment. The government can create a regulatory reform, letting the private sector can do their jobs in fostering, in advancing the development and financing for development, because the government's money is not enough. And for this case, I might suggest that we should think how to double down this kind of efforts on the public sector as catalytic rules, enabling environment, regulatory reform, and creating also infrastructure development. At the same time, we invite the private sector to do the job in fostering and also inviting investment to help the government, especially for those very prominent sectors, maybe tourism, maybe infrastructures, energy, health sector, and including agribusiness. From Dwi, this is a very, very relevant question. As you know, in AI now, at least around out of 10 countries who has been investing in AI, so US, Singapore, Norway, and China is among the highest investor on AI. So this AI is not only talking about the AI usage, but also computing capability, how the multimodal data is available inside the country. Is there any very robust network, let's say landline, fixed broadband, and is there any devices also available inside the country? So this kind of the necessary conditions to leverage, not only to chase the new technological age of the AI, but also much more important thing for Indonesia, very, very wide, also very, very, so many young populations. I believe that broad adoptions on AI understanding and usage is much more important. So this actually ongoing progress so far. In the future global landscape, we learn the knowledge at technological age from AI, but also at the same time in domestic policy, we should create more broad adoption policy so that many people, especially the youngsters, young populations, can enhance the capacity and capability in competing themselves with the global needs, especially for seeking high paying and high quality jobs. From Johanna, climate change, indeed, in many parts of the world, including the World Bank study, the carbon is new gold. But as you know, there are so many standards. So first, I think we have to make sure our regulatory inside the country is robust, comprehensive, and understandable, so that many investors or maybe many players, domestic players, maybe international players, can understand the level playing field inside the country. The second, I think we should foster this kind of the carbon, maybe what you call it, carbon economy, carbon trading, carbon platform, carbon market, and other things. Many people will talk about high integrity carbons. So how this relates to the greenwashing, how this relates into the achieving the net zero emission, how this relates the policy consistency inside the country, and how this relates into the pricing of this carbon to domestic market as well as the global market. So high integrity carbon is the common currency we should develop and we should foster so that many investors can understand and can value our carbon market and carbon pricing appropriately. And the third one, because this is actually a new frontier of many policy in many countries on the carbon part, in my view, we should also exchange and develop our own database. So not to depend by any countries, we have to develop our own database, robust database, transparent, reliable database, so that we can monitor, we can evaluate, and also we can, introduce. Could become like a global emerging market, carbon market database that could be introduced and also could be promoted to other countries. So this is very, very difficult and open questions for Joanna. Hopefully, I could give you some idea on this issue. Back to Mbak Aprilia.
Okay. Thank you, Pak Wempi, for the insightful answers, and thank you for 6 participants. I hope those 6 questions represent our curiosity about this topic. Probably, Pak Wempi, would you like to give a closing statement to conclude this session?
Yeah. Thank you very much for having me. And this title of the drive, what you call it, the presentation is very, very difficult. And this is heavy lifting. Hopefully, I can give you some ideas to create an understanding about the economic transformations in the changing world. There is no single recipe. But as far as I understand, around 3-4 years experience in the World Bank, please, especially for the youngsters, please never show weakness to show your ability, and please always ask difficult questions to increase your understanding and your knowledge. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for the very insightful session with us. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, please give a big hand to Bapak Wempi Saputra. Thank you once again for making the time, Pak Wempi. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have a fruitful discussion today, and now we come to the end of the Common Q Learning Week, Day 1. To all participants who join us today, we would like to say thank you for your participation. Do not forget, for those who want to receive the certificate, participants are required to join the course in Common Q Learning Center, or KLC, and the join code will be 202601. And the second, complete the evaluation form available in the course. Stay safe and stay healthy. See you tomorrow on MOF Learning Week Day 2 with the theme Fiscal Sustainability, ensuring fiscal sustainability for long-term development with Mehwis Ashraf, Senior Country Economist, World Bank. I'm Afrilia. Good day and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.